There's Luganda, an article in 1998 on English and German intonation, pointed out that speakers adjust their F0 trajectories to fit the available voiced intervals. F0 can only be perceived in voiced intervals of speech, and when the voiced intervals were shortened by encroaching voiceless consonants or the end of the utterance, she found that some speakers in some languages truncated the F0 trajectory to fit it in, thus undershooting the target, or they sped up the movements, compressed the F0 trajectory so that it fit. Looking at these issues in Luganda, which is a Bantu tone language spoken in Uganda, it has contrast between three lexical tones, high, falling, and low, and also a contrast in length among all the consonants except for the approximants. So my question was how these consonants of varying lengths would affect the realization of high tone in language. I did a production study with 19 native speakers of Luganda. They produced each 120 sentences with a test syllable in the second syllable of the sentence, beginning with a sonorant, C1, then a vowel, a high tone vowel, and then a consonant C2, which could be a sonorant, a voiced obstruent, voiceless obstruent, and it could be geminate or singlet. So the F0 begins to rise in a high tone at the beginning of C1, it hits a peak at the end of the first vowel, and that pretty much was the same regardless of C2. Likewise, the peak was pretty much the same regardless of C2. As we can see, here's normalized F0 trajectories from the beginning of C1, and we can see for the first 100 milliseconds, the rise is pretty much the same. Where it hits the peak, what peak it hits is pretty much the same across these categories. But, okay, so here's the sonorant, okay, so pretty symmetrical rise, fall, regardless of whether it's a singleton or a geminate. Here is the voiceless stop. You can see the interruption of the F0 trajectory by the voiceless interval. And what I would like to point out is the rather shallow fall over the course of that voiceless interval, and then the quite steep fall after that, steeper than in the other voice categories. We can see that here in that, okay, during the sonorant consonant here, okay, so the rise up to the end of the vowel, beginning of the sonorant consonant, the fall takes course here during that geminate sonorant consonant. Likewise, during this geminate voiced obstruent stop. Whereas with the voiceless consonants, the fall over the voiceless interval is relatively shallow, and much of the fall is delayed till V2. To measure this, broke up the fall into two intervals, the interval from the peak to the beginning of voicing in V2, and the final interval from the beginning of voicing in V2 to the final minimal in V2. The initial fall, the fall in that initial interval was lower. The rate of fall in hertz per millisecond was lower in the voiceless categories than in the voice categories, and that was a significant effect in a mixed model regression analysis, whereas in the final interval, the fall rate was higher, and that was also significant. So what I see here is that the effect of voicelessness on the F0 trajectory in Luganda is neither a truncation effect nor a compression effect. It's in fact the opposite of compression. The F0 trajectory is spread out in order that the rise be in a voiced interval and the fall be in a voiced interval, presumably facilitating perception of the F0 contour.